Sorry that we're a couple minutes late here today, but thank you for your patience. Should be a really interesting program. Peter Navarro is here, an economist who served as Director of Trade and Manufacturing Policy during the Trump administration. He received a PhD in economics from Harvard University and authored the New MAGA Deal, the unofficial deplorables guide to Donald Trump's 2024 policy platform. And of course, in 2023, Mr. Navarro was imprisoned for contempt of Congress after refusing to comply with a subpoena from the January 6th committee. You can follow him on X, Real P Navarro, and his website is Peter Navarro. We will get to it. It should be very interesting. Stay with us. We'll be watching you on the Restream and, of course, over on the Rumble Rants. If you have questions for him there, please put them up. I'll try to keep an eye on it, and we'll see you right after this. Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say. Joint and muscle pains are exhausting and frustrating, but I've got a over-the-counter medication I'll introduce you to that provides great relief using the power of, check it out, chili peppers. Capsidin is made with a proprietary formula that contains no non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents, no opioids, no anesthetic or steroid, nothing, no chance for addiction, no side effects, no chance it's going to interact with other medication you might be taking. Capsidin contains capsaicin, which is the substance in chili peppers that burns your tongue. That gives you that burny feeling. And of course, I've recommended capsaicin creams to patients over the years, but other capsaicin creams burn your skin. That's what makes capsidin so unique. In clinical trials, capsidin has actually been demonstrated not to burn.
I've been using capsidin to relieve my pain in my hands and my wrist from carpal tunnel syndrome and arthritis. The results have been amazing. I use it every day during my show, and I highly recommend it.
Get the pain relief you need from various sources, even backache, sprains, bruises even. Order now at capsidin.com/Drew to get a 15% discount plus free shipping. That is CAPSADYN, capsidin.com/DREW. Because we are late, I want to get right to it with Peter Navarro, peternavarro.com, and on X, Real P Navarro, Navarro. Please welcome Peter Navarro.
And if
Welcome,
I may, newmagadeal.com is where you're directing everyone. I was in prison, so I haven't had a lot of time to update my peternavarro.com, but newmagadeal.com is where you can get this new book Don Jr.'s publishing. It's the 100 actions in 100 days if Donald Trump gets elected. And I, for one, think that this election, we have to run it on policy. I think we win on economy and inflation, the border, foreign policy, law and order, the weaponization of the justice system, which I was a target and victim of, and of course, some of these woke things like men and women's sports. So I just got out of prison. I don't know if you know this, but like 10 days ago. And there was 4 months of an interesting experience. But when I don't know if you saw me at the Republican National Convention, what I said was I went to prison, so you won't have to. And what I meant by that is, hey, just if you understand how I got into prison, I was put in prison by every single branch of the federal government, and only Democrats were involved. So what does that tell you about the power of our federal government to put people in prison for having differing political views? Frightening.
How was the experience? You said you were treated. It was an interesting experience. What happened there in prison?
Well, I'm 75 years old. It's no country for old men. I was in a facility with about 200 other inmates, 4 pods, 50 to a dorm. About half of them were in for drug-related offenses, sometimes with guns. Very multiracial, multicultural. But it was, I had the immediate respect of the inmates because they understood that I had gotten there for standing up for principle, and in their view, standing up to the federal government. And I just did my time. It was, I mean, the secret of it, I was able to get out, strong mind, strong body, strong spirit. I had a lot of mail coming in from people, supportive, thousands of pieces of mail. And my fiance visited every weekend. She was a rock. But this, I mean, if it can happen to me, I can assure you, anybody watching this show, it can happen to you, because all I'm really guilty of is defending the constitutional separation of powers. That's all I did. The first person ever charged with this crime, pure political target. And my experience, Doc, through the system, from the time I was taken down in an absolutely unnecessary, violent takedown at Reagan Airport with my fiance, put in leg irons, all the way through the system where I was stripped of every possible defense by an Obama-appointed judge. I had to go before a jury who, to a person, hated Donald Trump, and that hate rubbed off on me. It's just, the system isn't working, and this country isn't working right now. I spent 4 years in the Trump administration. The only thing I ever did for the first 3 years was create hundreds of thousands of jobs with the help of the president for him through his policies. And then when the pandemic came along, I don't know if you know what my role was in that, but I was one of the first to see the dangers. And I was the guy who was making sure we had the masks and the testing equipment, getting the monoclonal antibodies developed, things like that. And I get out of prison and I get hit with, I get out of the White House and I wind up in prison simply for doing my duty. So I would ask people watching this show to think about what's going to happen in November. I maintain that whether you like Donald Trump or not, his policies trump the woke White House. If you look at what people in the polls care about, it's the economy and inflation and the border security at the top. Trump leads by double digits. If you look at foreign policy, it's clear that people are much more comfortable with Trump dealing with China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran than they are first with Joe Biden. Now he's gone, and certainly with Kamala Harris, who has absolutely no foreign policy experience. I think a lot of people, Democrats, independents included, are increasingly frightened by the ability of the federal government to put people like me in prison. And I look, men and women's sports to me is kind of like the canary in the coal mine of all the woke policies of the Dems. So in the new MAGA deal, it's on Amazon, newmagadeal.com, you can get it there. What I tried to do, and I began writing it right after the debacle of the 2022 congressional election, where that red wave never materialized. What I try to do is provide people the information they need to evaluate the platforms. 100 actions in 100 days to solve the 6 or 7 major issues that are on voters' mind is what this election should be about. We know the Democrats are going to make it about hating Donald Trump and the abortion issue. But the polling says that what most people care about are the things that Trump really excels at. And I love the man. I've been in the Oval Office plenty of times. If you could just see the warmth he has, the humor, the care he has just for the common folk. He's a billionaire with the commoner's touch. You might have a different view of him, but even if you're upset with some of his tweets or whatever, you got it in this election, because there's so much at stake here. You have to look at the policies you want. Do you want to live in a country where you have to choose between food on the table, medicine in the cabinet, and a roof over your head? I don't think so.
Yeah, it's odd that there isn't more policy talk. There's just lots of persuasion, and now we got the word weird coming at everybody from all different angles, which is a military grade persuasion technique. But I want to drill in a couple things. So
Sure.
you went to prison for not testifying before the January 6th committee. Is that accurate? And if so, why did you choose to do that?
So let me give you the backstory here. I was one of only 3 people who served with the president from the 2016 campaign through to the end. And there's a basic principle that goes back to the days of George Washington and 50 years of Department of Justice policy that senior White House advisors such as myself in the executive branch cannot be compelled to testify before the legislative branch under the doctrine of executive privilege. And the reason why that's important, Doc, is because as the Supreme Court has opined numerous times upon, a president needs candor and confidentiality in his discussions between and among advisors. And that leads to the most effective presidential decision making. So I get a subpoena from the J6 committee as soon as President Trump invoked executive privilege, which he did immediately. By law, it was not mine to waive. Importantly, I repeatedly asked the committee, the J6 committee, to simply go to President Trump, his attorneys, and ask him to waive the privilege. And if he did that, I would have been happy to testify. So I had a choice. I could either do my duty, stand up for executive privilege and the constitutional separation of powers, or I could go in front of that committee and basically betray my oath of office and work to erode executive privilege and the constitutional separation of powers. And look, there's men and women, young men and women who put on their uniform, grab a gun, willing to risk their lives to defend this country. The least I could do is stand up in that way, Doc. That's what I did. I never should have went to prison. It's ridiculous they did that. I mean, if you look at the way that was done, but I don't regret for a minute the decision I made, because this case ultimately will wind up at the Supreme Court. The law should be settled in my favor, and if that happens, the Constitution will be preserved. And if it doesn't, God help this country. So there it is. No regrets. And I stood up for an important principle, and I hope people understand that. I was happy to testify. They waived the privilege. The J6 committee never made any effort to do that, and here we go.
And so it's so interesting to me. Did you it looks to me, and maybe I'm misjudging old footage of you speaking before committees and whatnot, but I feel like I'm seeing a changed person. Am I correct about that? And did you, if that's so, no, well, let me just put it this way. Did you ever imagine, wait, hold on. But hold on. Did you ever, let me frame it this way then. Did you ever imagine at this stage of your career, what I'm flabbergasted by, that I have to defend my right to free speech? You must be flabbergasted that you had to defend your oath of office. It just seems, it's so insane that at this stage of life, here we are doing something that our entire lives have seemed axiomatic and matter of fact in the American system.
The context for me is my 4 years in the White House, and right after the November election in 2016 when Donald Trump won. I was there watching the lawfare of the Democrats, starting with the FBI doing the Russia hoax, the 2 impeachments, the this, the that, now after this. And the important part here, Doc, is in 2019, after Pelosi gained control of the House of Representatives and the subpoenas started to fly, I watched virtually all of my colleagues in the White House receive subpoenas from Congress. Don McGahn, the White House legal counsel. You had Rob Porter, the staff secretary, Rick Dearborn, the legislative affairs guy, Kellyanne Conway, political counselor, Hope Hicks. And each time that happened, Each time that happened, the Department of Justice wrote a letter to the Congress and said, you can't do that. They have absolute testimony under the doctrine of executive privilege and constitutional separation of powers. I saw that. And then I saw in 2021 when they started subpoenaing more of my colleagues in the White House, Meadows, Scavino, Patel, all of these other people. And again, it was the same deal. So I wasn't surprised. Look, I wasn't surprised by any of this. The only thing here's what shocked me, and it should shock every American. I thought I'd get a fair trial. Sir. But I had this judge, his name's Ahmed Maida, and he's an Obama appointee. His wife, and I hate to get family in, but it's relevant here. His wife works for one of the biggest Democrat lobbying and fundraising firms. The judge himself raised money for Obama. You can look at it as a down payment on his appointment. And what he did, the same thing that Marshawn did with Trump and another judge did with Steve Bannon, I was stripped of every single defense before I got to the jury. In America. And it's just this, there's something fundamentally wrong now with our system. So I'm the same. The difference now, only difference in me now is I have lot less faith in the judiciary system from learned experience. That isn't working. You can't have a District of Columbia court where there's a 2-to-1 Democrat majority. And when the worst thing they did to me, hands down, was after I was found guilty, what should have happened in a case where there's significant constitutional issues to be settled up the chain to the Supreme Court, you always release that person pending appeal. You let that person go through the appeals process. This SOB, Ahmed Maida, refused to release me pending appeal. I took that to the appeals court, and 3 Democrat judges denied my appeal. I mean, it was like, wow, this is like every single person who put me in that prison. So I went to prison so you won't have to simply means that, hey, look at what the Democrats do when they're in power. And by the way, I have no problem with Democrats, particularly traditional Democrats. One of the lines that got left out in my speech at the RNC for time constraints was something on the order of, to win this election, we're going to have to not just unite the Republican Party, we're going to have to unite the country. That's why I want to reach out to every Democrat. Now, check these boxes for me, Doc. Disengaged from, disenfranchised by, or disgusted with the radical left turn the Democrat elites have taken the Democrat Party. I mean, I was a Democrat years ago. I was a working class, blue collar Democrat. We won in 2016 with blue collar Democrats. And I gotta think that as strong as the Trump base is, that Democrat base is fractured because the Democrat elites in the White House and running the White House are running policies that have little to do with the kitchen table values of mainstream traditional working class Democrats. So there's a lot of work to do. And if we lose this election, I truly believe we're going to lose this country. It's that simple.
This whole thing, I'm just sitting here thinking about the fact that I interviewed George Papadopoulos and his wife Simona Mangiante back in 2000. Susan, was that 17 or something? 18?
No, 2019.
2019. And he was one of the early objects of all this excess. If you remember, he was accused of having connections with the Russian government. His wife, who had a heavy Italian accent, was accused of being a Russian spy. I mean, and by the way, if I were casting a woman as a Russian spy, she would be cast in that role. But the press went with it. It rides to this day that's who they were. And it just started way, way, way back when. And it's so challenging to understand how we change directions. And to my I'm thinking about these judges that treated you unfairly. They were in a hysteria. Judges are humans just like everybody else. You were a treasonous, you were a traitor. You committed treason, and they were in an hysterical state that they remained in all the way through COVID. I mean, think about all the hysteria. And what scares me the most is I was reading a book just last week about early 1930s Germany. And there was in that book a series of reports from people living there at the time, American ambassadors, American, diplomats and things. And the word hysteria comes up again and again and again. And I never imagined that what seemed like a fairy tale to me my entire life was actually about a similar kind of hysteria, different circumstance, different everything. I get it. But hysteria is a very dangerous thing when people lose track of their rational capacities. And I think that's, as much as anything, what you were subjected to.
It's you say hysteria, I say Trump derangement syndrome.
That's an hysterical syndrome. That's hysteria.
I think it's worse than that, in the sense that if you go back to 2016, there's been concerted efforts to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. It began with trying to stop him from winning. Right after he won, it continued with them taking out some of his key lieutenants, like Mike Flynn, for example. I mean, that was a pure entrapment job. And then you saw all these efforts with all the impeachments, and then now. I remember during the debate with Biden, they asked President Trump, well, if you lose, will you obey the results and say it was a fair election? And I'm thinking to myself, good God, we're in June now. We got over 100 days to go to November, and they've already cheated incredibly. I mean, you think about this. You have a coordinated lawfare attack on the president through 3 different major courts in Atlanta, New York, Washington, D.C., where it's all coordinated. The president has to divert hundreds of millions of dollars away from the campaign into his legal expense, hundreds of hours of his time from thinking about and campaigning about the presidency to defending himself from judges that have the power to take $500 million from him and put him in prison. And that's already massive election interference. And look, I would say this. I was on a show, a lefty show, and they're trying to draw this equivalence between, well, they're putting Menendez in prison and Hunter Biden in prison. Why do you call it partisan? I'm thinking to myself, look, I'm standing up for the Constitution. Menendez is a sociopath. Hunter Biden is a sex trafficker, a drug addict, and worst of all, sold the country out to the communist Chinese. How do you do that? And even with folks, other Trump people, the Papadopoulos, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, they all talk about that, but none of that was like constitutional principles. I mean, I'm sui generis here. This is like a major, important, landmark constitutional case. And the Democrats, this ends justify the means. They don't understand that if my case is not adjudicated by the Supreme Court and ruled in my favor, every time Republicans control all 3 branches of government, you bet your bippy that those Democrats are going to wind up subpoenaed and in prison. We don't need that. We don't want that. So
right, it's got to stop.
It's
got to stop.
Really,
it's an adulteration.
Accountability. I mean, Garland, Smith, Bragg, Willis, Marchand, and some of these other judges need to be held accountable. Okay, I'm not into the Old Testament retribution, but if we let them get away with that, they're just going to do it again. So, but this election, I get back to the book, New MAGA Deal, newmagadeal.com, on Amazon. There's the other thing about this book, Doc, that's important. And if you go back to 2022, when Biden gave his, I call it the red wedding speech, when he had that, remember he had the red background behind him. You're a psychologist, like red background with the jack-booted soldiers by him. And all he's doing is dumping on MAGA as extremists. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. I know better than anybody what MAGA stands for. It was forged in the cauldron of the 2016 campaign. And I write about it in the new MAGA deal book. It's I call it the Iron Triangle of MAGA. It's three things. It's a strong manufacturing base through things like Buy America and fair trade. It's secure borders for both economic reasons to protect black, brown, and blue-collar Americans and to defend ourselves against Chinese spies, Islamic terrorists, drug cartels, and all that. And the third thing, which really goes to my experiences in the administration when I was up at Walter Reed, the end to endless wars, because I would see, it would break my heart, it'd break the president's heart to see these veterans with no legs, no arms, sometimes no limbs, who had been cannon fodder in these decades-long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that's all that differentiates Donald Trump from traditional republicanism. Sure, we support lower tax burden, lower regulatory burden. That's traditional republicanism. Why Donald Trump beat 16 Republicans in 2016 was the MAGA principles of a strong manufacturing base, border security, and endless wars. And I was the point guy for the top part of that, the manufacturing, because I was the guy who worked on the trade deals, worked on the Buy American and things like that. And I had a small but I think important role in the border security, because the way we finally was able to seal the border was to threaten tariffs on Mexico so that they would accept this thing called the Safe Third Nation Agreement, right? And I'm in the office with Pat Cipollone, the White House legal counsel. The president's frustrated with all these Obama judges basically thwarting every time he tries to do something on border security. The Democrats are screwing up his wall and this, that, and the other thing. And he says, how about if we do tariffs on Mexico until they take these people? He looks at Cipollone. Cipollone looks at me. I said, you can do that under the national security rules. Cipollone says, you can do that. He says, let's do it. That day, he threatens Mexico with tariffs unless they adopt the Safe Third. Heads explode in the corporate media. It's like, oh, whoa, it was crazy. By the next day, Mexico had sealed that border. They sent 25,000 troops there. We had the Safe Third. The Northern Triangle countries, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, adopted those within the month, and the border was secure. And the first thing that Joe Biden did, it was like stupid. The first thing he did was write an executive order to undo those agreements, opens the border, and a few months later, who does he call on to secure the thing? Kamala Harris. The one significant thing he asked Vice President Kamala Harris to do in 4 years. One thing. She went down to the border, stuck her nose up in the air, sniffed the stench coming over the Rio Grande, headed back to Washington in Air Force Two, and 8 million or more illegal immigrants followed her in to wreak havoc across this country. That's on her. So this is an election which we cannot allow them to attack us as extremists. In MAGA, the new MAGA deal book explains why we can defend ourselves. And this has to be a campaign that we fight on policy, because we beat them on every single policy.
Yeah, it's gone from Hitler to you're just weird, because Hitler results in assassination attempts very clearly. We have to take a little break here. Peter Navarro is with us. The New MAGA Deal is the book. On X, it is Real P Navarro. I appreciate you being here. There is the book. Go get it. Read it if you want to know what the policies are rather than what the rhetoric is and the persuasion and the propaganda, which we should get our heads out of that completely. It's a waste of our time, and it's unpleasant. We got a lot to get into. I want to get into COVID. I want to get into your thoughts about the Chinese. I want to get to some thoughts more, again, on more of your economic solutions right after this. Many of us have not gotten over COVID. I'm not talking about the virus itself, but the response. We were flabbergasted by what the government could do to us. There is no telling what they might pull next time, and it's looking more like there will be a next time. So we all have to be what I call rationally ready. That's where the wellness company comes in. TWC is about access to physicians via telehealth, access to potentially life-saving medication. Years ago, having access to medication and telehealth might have seemed crazy, but now it seems crazy not to. Now, with claims that gain-of-function research have been done on the bird flu, I urge everyone to take control of their healthcare with the help of the wellness company. Go to drdrew.com/TWC for 10% off all their products, including the 4 medical kits, each of which has a different purpose. And we've added Tamiflu to one of them in case the bird flu does become a problem for humans. Be rationally ready. drdrew.com/TWC for 10% off. Of course, I'm a fan of the healthy aging supplement True Niagen. I've been taking it almost for a decade myself. This supplement boosts NAD, which your cells need to survive properly metabolically, and it goes down as we age. It does so with a nutrient called nicotinamide riboside, or NR, specifically patented form of NR called Niagen. It's the most efficient and trusted NAD booster. NAD can also play a role in reproductive health. Boosting NAD is recommended with prenatal vitamins for women over 30 looking to start a family. Here's Dr. Amy, also known as the Egg Whisperer, a highly influential specialist in this area.
That was when I said, this is amazing. I need every single person going through fertility to take it. I not only take it myself, my patients have shared stories. They took it and then they got pregnant naturally. And that's really my goal, is I want people to empower themselves with the tools so that they can get pregnant without my help.
True Niagen is an amazing NAD booster. You're going to want to add it to your reproductive health arsenal. And of course, it's in our family of Dr. Drew sponsors. Go to drdrew.com/True Niagen for 20% off your order. That is drdrew.com/True Niagen. Enter Dr. Drew at checkout for 20% off. I'm excited to bring you a new product, a new supplement, Fatty. I take it. I make Susan take it. My whole family takes it. This comes out of, believe it or not, dolphin research. The Navy maintains a fleet of dolphins. And a brilliant veterinarian recognized that these dolphins sometimes developed a syndrome identical to our Alzheimer's disease. Those dolphins were deficient in a particular fatty acid. She replaced the fatty acid, and they didn't get the Alzheimer's. Humans have the same issue, and we are more deficient in this particular fatty acid than ever before. And a simple replacement of this fatty acid called C15 will help us prevent these syndromes. It's published in a recent journal called Metabolites. It's a new nutritional C15, pentadecanoic acid it's called. The deficiency that we are developing for C15 creates something called the cellular fragility syndrome. This is the first nutritional deficiency syndrome to be discovered in 75 years and may be affecting us in many ways, and as many as 1 in 3 of us. This is an important breakthrough. Take advantage of it. Go to fatty15.com/Dr. Drew to receive 15% off a 90-day starter kit subscription, or use code Dr. Drew at checkout for that 15% off, or just go to our website, drdrew.com/fatty15.
That's brilliant. And thank you, Drew. Where's Dr. Drew? Where is he? Dr. Drew. Dr. Drew.
A couple other things to remind you about. I speak about mental health, of course, and well-being, but your financial health also very important. We live in uncertain and volatile times. No one knows what's going to happen, but you might want to protect yourself financially. And you could sleep well at night by investing in hard assets, including physical gold and silver. In 2024, gold and silver are surging, and experts are predicting they will continue to climb. Historically, these have been among the safest investments, allowing you to hedge against runaway inflation. Of course, I don't provide financial advice, but you can protect yourself with your investments at Golden Crest Metals. They can help you move a portion of your IRA into gold or silver. Call Golden Crest Metals at 833-426-3825 for a free guide on protecting your financial future with gold and silver. See if you qualify for up to $5,000 in free silver. 833-426-3825 is where you call, or visit goldencrestmetals.com to request free info guide. That is goldencrest.com, goldencrestmetals.com. And also, I want to finally just finish with our friends at Paleo Valley. You know, we're huge fans of their products. And a lot of factors are going, key components these days are the food we eat. We're all watching very carefully. We've talked to Callie Means on this show. You know that what you eat matters. And of course, we love Paleo Valley's bone broth and meat sticks. They're carefully sourced. We don't have to go a day without them. I just bone broth before coming up here. Grass-fed and finished bone broth is made with bones, not hides. It makes a big difference. They really pay attention to how they've sourced and provided us these foods. Bones have, of course, collagen, a major component found in connective tissue. It maintains structure and integrity of your skin, bones, tendons, muscles, and for the beef, chicken, and pork venison sticks, they're delicious, low calorie. They're fermented. They're just so carefully created. If you have not tried or subscribed, go to drdrew.com/paleovalley for 15% off your first order, 20% off when you subscribe, so you never run out. That is drdrew.com/paleovalley. All right, so we're back with Peter Navarro. I want to get right back to that. And before the break, we were talking a little bit about many things, and you had mentioned economic solutions in your book. I mean, you're a PhD in economist, you're a Harvard-trained economist. I just want to kind of zero in, if you don't mind. I know we can get the specifics by reading your book, but what is the most critical issue threatening us today from an economic standpoint? Is it the deficit? Is it inflation? Is it uncontrolled government spending? You know, where is the landmine that should keep us up at night, and you as an economist keeps you up at night?
See, yeah, all of those things are interrelated. So I think the top two issues that we have to deal with immediately, border security and the economy. So if you look at the economy, inflation is obviously the thing that's really worrying people. So as an economist, let me unpack that for you. There's two kinds of inflation: demand pull, cost push. Okay. So the demand pull inflation, too much money chasing too few goods, has been created on steroids by Kamala Harris sitting there with her gavel in the Senate as the tiebreaker, passing all of these massive spending bills that we don't have money to fund, and the investments that they're making are not going to pencil out. They're misrepresented as infrastructure. They're more like giveaways. So we've got the demand pull inflation going this direction. The cost push, which raises the cost of production, is a function of having our production offshore. That gives us fragile and unresilient supply chains. And so something gets out of whack there, that drives up cost push inflation. So what we did during the Trump administration, when we had virtually no inflation, is we were fiscally responsible, number one. So that dealt with the demand pull inflation. And then from the cost push side, I was one of the tips of the spear of bringing our supply chains and manufacturing home. So we've got to attack that right from the outset. And then the border security thing comes in, because what people are concerned about is food, shelter, medicine. And when you have, for example, inflation going up, and then you have millions of illiterate illegal aliens flooding into the labor market, what that does, the inflation drives down real wages, your spending power, and the force of the supply of this new labor drives down wages through the forces of supply and demand. So people, particularly in the lower income, mid to lower income groups, are getting hammered. So all this stuff is intertwined. What you do in economics is what we call general equilibrium analysis. You can't solve anything by one single thing. I think another issue is getting Fed policy right. Jerome Powell has been a disaster. He raised rates too late, and he's probably going to lower them too soon, and that's another problem. I think what I'm saying here is that inflation was created by Harris and Biden in the White House. You can understand exactly why. And in the Trump administration, we didn't have those problems because we didn't do stupid stuff like that. So I deal with there's 37 chapters in the new mega deal. A number of them are on the economy and border security. And it's 100 actions in 100 days. newmagadeal.com, where you can get a signed copy. You can get it on Amazon. And one of the punchlines of the book, and one of the things I said in my speech, was simply this: if we don't control our country, their government will control us. And that's the struggle here. I mean, I'm just so unimpressed with the economic advisors in the Harris-Biden White House, because they were the same ones that were there with Obama. And if you compare, like, for Donald Trump, the god of the economy is growth. Okay, real GDP growth. We try to hit 3% and 4%. During the Obama years, they were the new normal, if you remember that language, Doc, but it was like 1% to 2%. And when you do that, you don't generate the tax revenues you need to pay for the public services you need, and you don't generate wage increases. So I guess what I'm saying here is that elections matter. Trump, you were safe, you were secure, you were more prosperous. And with Biden Harris, I mean, we can't do 4 more years of this. I'm just telling you, as an economist, we can't do 4 more years of what they're doing.
You know, I will go into any White House to help out if I can. And I was called into, what was the woman from Texas's name that was in the upstairs office in the Oval Office? Deborah something, I think. And she called me in there.
In the Trump White House? The Trump White House? Yeah, Rollins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was lovely, and she was questioning me about the homeless thing, and she introduced me to a big, tall guy who was part of the economic advisor group. And you must know what I'm talking about. I just thought he was so bright, and he was asking me the greatest questions. And after a few minutes of talking, he goes, "What would happen if we did away with the IMD exclusion?" I said, "Well, that would make a big difference." It's the exclusion for mental health, essentially mental disorders. Did you work with that guy? I lost track of him after that. Why didn't the IMD exclusion? Is just too expensive, and we just couldn't handle it? What happened with that?
I don't know about that. The guys who were in charge of economic policy for the Council of Economic Advisors was first a guy named Kevin Hassett, extremely competent, and he turned it over to one of the young guns who I have great respect for, a guy named Tyler Goodspeed. And I mean, look, it's as simple as if you look at what Trump did for 4 years, you can be totally confident that the economy will run better, that you'll be safer in your homes from crime, and you'll be less worried, never get away with the no worries, but less worried about China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. These are very dangerous countries. I mean, you've seen that for the last 4 years, we've totally unraveled our fiscal position, and we're going off a fiscal cliff because of overspending. We've had the worst inflation we've had since the 1970s, when we had the stagflation era. That was all created by Biden-Harris. And if you remember, one of the funniest things the president ever said, which was deadly serious, was when we were trying to get the rocket man to stop testing his rockets. Because what Kim Jong-un in North Korea is trying to do is develop nuclear weapons and missiles that are capable of hitting Seattle, Chicago, and New York. I mean, that's what he wants to do. He makes no bones about it. And if he can do that, then he can basically hold us hostage to whatever crazy crap he wants to do. And the boss tried to cajole him first, and that sort of worked. But then finally, Kim Jong-un makes some speech about, "I'm going to hit you with a rocket." And the boss kind of gets on the tube, and he says, "Look, we got bigger rockets." And that was that. I mean, I was at the DMC with the president in Korea when he made that historic trip there. Everybody thought that was crazy, but that's the kind of smart diplomacy that Donald Trump does. And in Trump's America, Communist China, Imperial Russia, the mullahs of Iran, and the Rocket Man left us and the rest of the world alone. Why? Because unlike with folks, I mean, look, they've never respected Joe Biden. The nickname for Kamala Harris among them is lunch. They're going to eat her for lunch. She has no experience in foreign policy whatsoever. Yet they fear and respect Trump. So, I mean, there's real policy and leadership differences here.
Susan, I want you to listen carefully because we're going to talk about China now. You've described China as a coiled python preparing to strike, particularly Taiwan. How do we ever? And you said if our government doesn't take care of business, they will take care of business. I assume that they could be China. So what do we do with that significant and prodigious adversary?
Well, let's see. I wrote 3 books about that: Coming China Wars, Death by China, Crouching Tiger, which says that it's a very complicated issue because they're hitting us on so many angles, right? But the first thing you have to understand as an American is that the military budget of Communist China is roughly equivalent to our trade deficit with China. Therefore, when we're buying all that made in China stuff, we're essentially paying for their missiles and their jets and their ships and their tanks and their personnel. And they're using that to basically intimidate countries throughout Asia. And if push comes to shove in Taiwan, to sink American aircraft carriers. So number one, we have a weapon in our hands. Death by China was the movie, like don't buy made in China. So we start there. In terms of what the government can do, I came up with this thing. It was one of my funner moments in the White House. It just kind of came out of nowhere. I was on one of the Sunday shows with Chris Wallace when he was still on Fox. The obnoxious individual he is, and he hits me with a China question. Well, what's wrong? And I said the 7 deadly sins, right? And it's like if you look at what China does, it's not just the cheap labor; it's the currency manipulation. It's the massive subsidies. It's the state-owned enterprises. It's the brutal counterfeiting and piracy of our things. It's the fentanyl, which they're killing 100,000 Americans now a year with. And so what you do to defend yourself against China was the Trump tariffs on China. That was brilliant. It's the one thing Biden hasn't repealed. I mean, we took a lot of heat on that. Remember, we took a lot of heat on those tariffs, but they haven't been repealed because that's a good defense. You cannot let them invest so much money in our stock markets and real estate. You can't let us invest in their stock markets because that funds their military. So those are some of the things we have to do and that the president was doing. And if we were in a second term now, you can bet this. Russia would not have invaded Ukraine. And you wouldn't see communist China being as aggressive with Taiwan as it is. It would certainly go through its kind of kabuki stuff that it always does, but it wouldn't be as upfront in our face. And China right now, let's face it, China right now, because the Harris-Biden administration doesn't know what they're doing. They're weak. They're distracted by the Gaza, by the Ukraine, our arsenals being drained. Communist China sees that as an opportunity. Doc, every time Communist China has taken territory through war, it's been when the superpowers were distracted. I mean, you go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis. What did China do then? It invaded India, and it took territory that it holds to this day. So it's just, look, it's the biggest existential threat to this country. Right now, we're distracted by the border, which we should be. We got to handle that, and everything going on in the rest of the world. So Donald Trump can do many things at the same time. We can do China and the border at the same time, I can assure you.
And Caleb, you mentioned that people on the Restream and the Rumble Rants are wanting to know about Dr. Navarro's experience in prison. He spoke about that at the beginning. Was there something we missed?
Yeah, there were just people asking more questions about his experiences there, how he was treated and things like that. I think possibly newer viewers that picked it up in the middle.
Go ahead.
I mean, look, I have a lot to say about that. When I was in there, I uncovered a $5 billion scandal, but it's not something for this election cycle. It's a problem that I want to get solved, and I've spoken about. It has to do with how the prison system is grossly mismanaged by Biden, Harris, and Colette Peters, the supervisor of the prison system. And I think there's no question that the Democrats will regret embedding me in that prison, because it was like putting an investigative reporter in who has fairly significant policy skills to analyze what is one of the signal failures of that administration. But this is not the time to talk about this, because prison reform is down here. What's up here is the economy, border security, foreign policy, the weaponization of our justice system, crime in our cities, and the woke policies that are permeating our K through 12 schools, women's sports, and our Pentagon, our corporations, and people. That's what I'm focused on. That's why the new MAGA deal for me is really important. I've written a lot of books, but this one coming in the days that it's coming, to me, if people just simply want to understand the 100 actions in 100 days Trump's going to do and why MAGA is mainstream, I will have accomplished my mission. Prison's behind me for now. I will come back to that when the time comes. But for now, look, and I was there for 4 months. No country for old men, to be clear.
I think that more of what they're curious about, and you may have spoken about this at the beginning of the show and I missed it, but I think they're curious about how were you treated by the other people that were in the prison with you, because technically to a lot of them,
they said extremely well.
A lot of people may not understand the politics, but you refused to snitch. No. And so shouldn't you have been treated well by people there?
It's kind of an interesting, there's the moral equivalence there between not being a snitch and being somebody who refuses to talk to the legislative branch from the executive branch because of the Constitution. It's not exact, but people respected me for that. And I'll tell you, in all honesty, I occupied a unique space because I'm with Trump on respect for the uniform. Okay, these people who are in uniform, whether it's the ICE, whether it's the Border Patrol, whether it's our police officers, whether the people who work in prisons, I respect them. Okay, whereas inmates, it's more of a cops and robbers kind of thing. There were some bad guards there. There were some people who didn't belong there. But for the most part, there were some great public servants. So I had their respect because they knew I respected the uniform. I actually worked with the warden and the camp administrator, Verdejo, quite a bit on some of the getting some of the problems there. I mean, the food I lost 15 pounds. I went in there at fighting weight and I lost 15 pounds. The medicine's bad, this, that, and the other thing. But don't cry for me, Argentina. The point is that on the inmate side, there's a hatred for Biden and Harris for the way they've treated people. I mean, Harris is known not for being tough on crime. That wasn't the thing when she was the DA in Oakland. It was for putting proud young black men in prison for nickel bags of marijuana, and then going out at night and smoking a joint or drinking wine with the Gavin Newsoms of this world and laughing about it. That pisses them off.
It does seem to set what happened to you apart, because even if people aren't familiar with all of the details of the case and why you were sent there because you were sticking with your principles. not
Yes.
because you committed
that's what he's
heinous crime.
He's made that very, very clear that he and defending. Well, that's why it's going to go to the Supreme Court. It's this constitutional issue, and for me, my last topic, Peter, is COVID and the overreach, the excesses. I know you're very concerned with the lawfare. I'm very concerned with the weaponization of the public health system, and how that
We
public
don't
health,
control our government, they will control us. It's the same thing. Go ahead.
public health has been used all the way back to the French Revolution as the way to carry out literally terror. Salut Public, that was Robespierre's committee, the Public Health Committee that chopped off all the heads. And so when I saw what happened, I can't get over it. I can't get over the excesses that were deployed in the name of public health. Is there any solutions that you see for those excesses? I know we're not going to get any apologies. People seem to be doubling down now in more recent months. Is there any solutions for that, or is that just going to have to wind its way through the state legislatures and judicial systems?
I don't know how familiar you are with my role in the administration on COVID and my fights with Fauci. Is that something on your radar screen?
No, please tell us.
Oh, well, look, in 2006, in the coming China wars, I actually wrote that China would likely cause a global pandemic because of the way they handle things there. Okay. So I knew as soon as I began getting some of the intel as early as December of 2019, that there was something that could be a great danger. And I knew as early as then that there was the Wuhan lab there that's a bioweapons lab. And so one of the first things, it's a great story. One of the first things the president asked me to do was in January 28th, I go into this iconic situation room. And my mission for the president was to convince everybody in that situation to support his proposal for a travel ban on China. And I go in there, Mulvaney, the chief of staff, is chairing the meeting. And across the way are me, these couple of guys, this little guy and this big guy, didn't know who they were, okay? And within 5 minutes, I'm in a shouting match with this little son of a bitch who was like this parrot saying, travel bans don't work, travel bans don't work. And he seemed to me like he was the kind of person who thought he was smarter than everybody in the room and thought he knew more than everybody did. Didn't know who he was then. And I walked out of there and I did not have the support I needed. And that night I wrote a memo that said that if we don't put this travel ban in and we don't take care of business on this virus, 500,000 people are going to die and it's going to cost the economy trillions of dollars. I wrote that on January 28th, 2020. Okay? You think about that. The pandemic wasn't declared for months later. I sent that out to everybody on the list, and as soon as I did that, they had to cover their ass. And it turns out that little guy I was talking to was friggin' Tony Fauci. And I would fight that son of a bitch the whole time I was in the White House. I looked right through him. He was the guy who fought. I had 1 million tabs of hydroxychloroquine distributed throughout the country to places. If you look at the science to this day, that stuff works in the first 7 days. It would have saved millions of lives. I had to fight him on that. And he was the guy who was pushing therapies. And then we find out, of course, that he was behind the gain of function lab. So my point is, if there was one thing that you could stop, if you wanted to stop the medical industrial complex, it would be to hold Tony Fauci accountable, to actually investigate what I think were the crimes where he lied to Congress, he covered things up, and he's responsible and has blood on his hands for killing millions of people because of what he did. And there's no question in my mind that he's guilty of that, or at least should be investigated. And he's skating on that. You put him and you put him in a subpoena thing, and you make him testify or declare the fifth. you find out all the stuff he did to cover things up. He was the guy that covered up the virus from the lab thing. He orchestrated a cover up using funds from the NIH to bribe researchers with grants to lie about where that virus came from. That's a fact. Why is he out there running around free and folks like me go to prison? I can't figure that one out, other than the fact that if we don't control our government, their government will put us in prison.
Well, Peter, this has been very interesting. There's many more topics I know we could get into, but you've been very kind, giving us your time and your thoughts. What are you doing these days other than campaigning and telling your stories and writing books? And I actually don't know this history. Do you come from academia? Did you spend time in academia before you went into government?
Yeah, I was a professor at the University of California, Irvine, teaching at a business school. 25 years I did that, but I was a professor of public policy, and I've always been policy oriented. So the thing, if you got just a minute with J.D. Vance, I have a real bond with him, even though I've never met him. We're two sides of the same coin, because in 2003, after China entered the World Trade Organization, I was looking at the macro economy, wondering why people were losing their jobs, why growth was slowing down. And that's when I started my research on China. And like, I'm looking at 30,000 feet, the disaster in the Midwest, I'm seeing specks, and the specks were people like J.D. Vance and his family and community, right? And so he understands at that level what I understood up there and what President Trump understood before us. So that's how I got into that. As to what I'm doing, look, my fiance was, in fact, she just tried to get in front of the camera there with her head by accident. So, you come over here. You come over here if you want. Okay, look.
We saw her at the convention.
A big fan of yours, Doc, and she's just like, I don't know, I love her to death. And here's the thing. Those SOBs took my freedom, okay? I'm a soldier, I took the bullet. But she did the time with me, and that's what I can never forgive people like Amit Mehta for. These people using lawfare against people like me who stand up for principle and do it because they can for political ends, that's just wrong. So we're in between the book deal in terms of new MAGA deal, trying to get that mission out because I'm mission oriented. It's been really great to spend some time with her again, other than in the visitor's room at the prison. And that's a whole nother set of stories I could tell you about.
Wow. Well, listen, you can follow Peter at Real P Navarro on X, and the new MAGA deal is where you should go and get the book. I look forward to reading it. And again, appreciate you being so generous with your time and your thoughts, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, a real pleasure, sir. Take care.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you. Say best to your fiance.
Nah.
So that was interesting. Caleb, you asked about the IMD exclusion. There was so much we were getting into. I didn't want to stop the roll. Institutions for mental diseases. The Medicaid system and all the public health system excludes coverage for brain diseases. How insane is that? They just excluded it. President Johnson, when he set up the Medicaid system, he put in the IMD exclusion. I don't really understand why. And if they would get rid of that, and they're sort of eroding it here and there, it would make a huge difference in getting these people who end up in the streets into real treatment.
How do they defend that today?
Many other things.
What's their reasoning to not change it?
You can't get people to treatment. The Lanterman-Petraeus Short Act. The Lanterman-Petraeus Short Act prevents people from getting into treatment. The IMD exclusion, it's just so many layers to it. It's just disgusting. But anyway, so interesting. Let me look at the rants and things here and see what you guys are saying. I hope you enjoyed what he was saying. For some reason, I've logged off the restream. Let's see. You guys on the rants, you're saying thank you to Navarro. Thank you guys for being a part of this. We do appreciate it. Anything on the restream, Caleb? I know I'm logged out all of a sudden, and now, of course, they want me to verify by clicking on fire hydrants.
A lot of a lot of very positive comments. A lot of people very grateful to hear his story. And it's honestly, it's like
interesting.
When I hear these stories, I just take all the politics, I remove that from the story, and I think if this was flipped on any of the sides, would I be offended and see something wrong here? And I see something wrong here. You're like, can they imagine for a second what will happen if they're using these things against their enemies when those people are back in power? This happens every 4 to 8 years.
It's so I took a bunch of nasty comments on X today for daring to talk to Peter Navarro. Again, whenever that happens, I figure I'm over the target. It's probably the right person to talking to. You can disagree with him, you can not like him, all kinds of things, but he has an interesting story to tell. He has a PhD in economics from Harvard. You might want to listen to him. Just listen, that's all. Whether you agree or not, you might have other ideas. Here's the upcoming show schedule. Naomi Wolf and Meryl Nass in here tomorrow. Jennifer Van Laaren, but Batya Ungar Sargon on August 1st. Kelly Victory is going to talk to John Bowden again. We have Susan on her transhumanism show that day. Scott Adams coming in on the 12th. And Salty Cracker coming in September 5th. We have our show, again, we are traveling a bit, so we're going to be a little bit choppy. And Caleb, you're going to love this. Susan suggested that in October we travel and do things from different parts of the world. So
I'm all for
if we
it.
are not having technical problems here, should be interesting to try it from other places.
Let's set you up with one of those mobile Starlink things so you can just take it anywhere and always have internet. We'll get a mobile one maybe.
I like this.
Reach out to
How
Elon.
about that? Interesting. Elon, please send it our way. We're in. Okay, so I also didn't get a chance to talk about our sponsors, which I'm excited about, and I am delighted we have the ones we have. Obviously, Fatty 15 is a new one. The pentadecanoic acid is a deficiency now. We need to replace it. I'm going to be doing a lot of different things. Caleb, all those scripts that I showed you really are sort of commercials for the show, so maybe we'll put some of those up here. The meat sticks at Paleo Valley. I'm hungry. I'm dying. So
Also, you said something wrong.
I went.
You said something. My show this week is with Zhao Ying Summers, and we're going to do a psychic speed oh God, I can't say it. Sorry, I ran down the hall. Psychic
I know how to
speed
get you
dating
up here
show.
and get you on mic now. If I misspeak about your show, you'll be right on it.
Transhumanism is the next week.
I see.
Oh, you're right.
Zhao
Yeah, it's the
Ying
next
Summers,
one. Yep.
Our friend and great comedian, and they're going to do a little psychic dating with her, which would be hysterical.
Sorry, I was putting on my makeup for my V-Shred taping.
Also, our friends at TWC, I can't say enough. As I said, you got to be rationally ready, everybody. You've seen the excesses. Imagine not being able to get access to some of these medications that you should have access to. There's no reason that patients shouldn't be empowered to have these things. And of course, backed up by telehealth and backed up by a description manual on how to use the medication. It's silly that we're not doing that. Did I leave anybody out? I'm going to eat my beef stick. I'm going to get my bone broth, which I'm very excited about. I'm starving for some reason.
Thank God you have those beef sticks.
I know, I'm dying. Psychic dating. There you go.
Psychic speed dating.
Yeah. Somebody's saying the contact form is busted. On doctor.com/contact.
No, contact at doctor.com. Just send the email there.
So contact at doctor.com. So maybe you've got the wrong website there. Okay, we'll check on it.
Well, just email contact.
All right, we appreciate Peter Navarro being here. We appreciate you all showing up and spending time with us. Let me see. I think Emily Barsh is texting me as she does during the show. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. She's telling you everything you did wrong.
I know. Let's see.
I had to run across the house to tell you. No.
There you go. Zhao Ying Summers.
But the transhumanism show I'm doing is going to be really good.
And tomorrow, again, I can apologize yet again to Naomi Wolf, and we'll get an update from Dr. Meryl Nass, who is constantly being attacked. I don't understand why would you attack this woman who's just trying to bring her wisdom to bear. All right, we'll see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock Pacific time. See you then. Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help.